There's a huge piece of, well, back to the same Dan Sullivan quote, there's a huge piece of, if I'm not fighting fires, what use am I?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if I see there's a fire, well, then obviously I should go get the fire extinguisher. And it's like,
Right.
no, someone else can get the fire extinguisher. It doesn't have to be you. You may need to tell someone, go get the fire extinguisher.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But you don't necessarily have to go get it and use it. You may say you need to go get it, and they're like, we don't know how to use it. Let me show you how to use it. Right? I mean, and that feels so inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But it's only inefficient the first time. It's not inefficient every time after that. And so what this really is back to, and I'm sure you'll put the link in the show notes, of delegation, right? True delegation is hard and it's very uncomfortable, right? And that's part of going from solo to CEO, is actually getting comfortable with and good at delegating, which really is more of a manager skill as opposed to a leadership skill.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen, we're here to show you how. One year ago, we launched The Business You Really Want, and you have made it clear which conversations matter most. Today, Gwen, we are talking about our number 2 most downloaded episode. So a year ago, we introduced the concept of the mindset shift that unlocks business growth without burning out our CEO. And that starts with changing your thinking from being a solopreneur to a CEO. So transitioning from doing everything yourself to thinking like a CEO. And I think it's very important to point out that this was our most downloaded episode up until about 8 weeks ago. So just so we're clear.
Was number 1, but we bumped it.
We did. We bumped it, which is still surprising, but we'll talk about that next week when we talk about our number 1 most downloaded episode. So Gwen, we have heard so much about this episode. This is probably one that has given us the most emails, the most response, and really because it forced people to think differently about how they view themselves as a business owner as their business changes, what it really means to be a leader, and what does it actually require of you to build a true business? What do you think of all of those things have made it so profound to listeners?
Because I think it's the place everybody struggles, right? Is unless you're starting with the plan of getting, some major funding and really wanting to start as that major CEO, which I don't think most of our listeners are in that camp. I mean, I'm not saying they can't be, but I think that that's not the majority of who we attract to this podcast. But unless you're doing that, you start out as a solo. You start out as the person doing all of the things, wearing all the hats, all of those pieces. And that transition to being a CEO isn't just a tactical move of you've got to have the business big enough and blah, 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 all the things that go along that. It is also a mental move. And people talk about it, but I think as often is the case here on The Business You Really Want, we talk about it differently, which I think gets people interested in it, about how do we go from being that solo brain entrepreneur to that CEO brain entrepreneur. And also acknowledging that not everybody can do that. I mean, if you pay attention to a lot of the, what I'll call the big boys out in the world, they often are no longer CEOing their business because they can entrepreneur it, but they can't CEO it. and because it's two different things, right? There's a big mind shift there. And so I don't think we talk about that enough because it's a big shift and it's not for everybody.
Yeah. So do us a favor and give us the definition. Explain, what is it when you say they can entrepreneur it, but they can't CEO it? What does that mean to you?
So for me, the difference of entrepreneuring it is, one of my favorite quotes that we talk about all the time from Dan Sullivan is that entrepreneurs are really good firefighters, which means sometimes they're also really good arsonists. Entrepreneurs really are good firefighters. They get in and they can figure out how to do something, and they've got all these ideas and doing all of the things. But at some point, that doing all of the things is actually not helping the business. It's actually becoming detrimental to the business, because at some point, and it varies on the business and there's all sorts of things, that what the business needs to be is just fundamentally boring. It needs to be doing things in a very boring, consistent sort of way. And if it's being done in a boring, consistent way, there shouldn't be a whole lot of fires. There probably are some, but they should be little tiny spot fires, not, big giant, blazes. And so we need the entrepreneur not going in and saying, well, this is boring, so I'm going to somehow make it exciting for me, right? The CEO really is about saying, how do we keep things consistent and doing what they need to do, even if they're growing, even if they're doing some of the other things, but they aren't doing it in this just dramatic way. And an entrepreneur tends to be doing it in big, dramatic ways. Not that that's wrong, but at some point it becomes less effective than they want it to be, which is usually when they bring in a CEO, they become, president of the board or, some other role, and often go build another business, which is great. Good for them, and it's also why you hear a lot of entrepreneurs talk about getting bought out. I sold my business. I sold my business. I sold my business. That's because it's no longer the business that they want to be doing as a true CEO, right? And so when we talk about solo to CEO, we're really talking about a phase in between those two. Right? Because to me, a true CEO is usually running a multi-million, many-personed business. And when I say many-person, I'm usually talking in the hundreds of people business.
Okay.
Right? Below that, it is a CEO role, but often being done in an entrepreneurial way.
Okay.
And that's really what we're talking about, going from solo to that.
Yeah. Okay. So we've given the example of kind of like the traditional example of what most people see when they see from entrepreneur to CEO. And now, which I think is important background, because I think sometimes when you're a business owner and you go to I'm going to say a retreat, a mastermind, whatever program, and they say, you need to think like a CEO. And of course, and I know I've sat in those seats too, the examples everybody gives you is like Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, whatever. And you're like, but I don't want a company with thousands of employees, right? Like I didn't create some amazing tech thing. Like I don't see myself there. And so it is hard to see the difference. So for you, I mean, thinking very specifically about our listeners, what do you think the listener today needs to know most about the shift from thinking like a solopreneur to thinking like a CEO under this definition? And go ahead and just kind of summarize the definition as well.
Yeah. So to me, this definition of CEO really is about the leader of a company as opposed to the doer of a company. Okay. And a leader of a company can still be doing, right? Because there is the leadership by example. There is, there's the servant leadership, examples that people talk about. Like there's lots and lots of ways to lead. So I'm not saying it's any one of these particular ways, and it can be a combination of all of them. But it's the difference of leading as opposed to doing, right? And to me, an entrepreneurial CEO is both a leader and a manager. And this is, I had a great friend. We did programs together where people would say, I don't want to be managed. I want to be led. And our argument always was, we're arguing about the wrong thing. That
Mm.
that these are not two opposing things and one is right and one is wrong. They're both things that need to happen. And
Mhm.
sometimes things need to be managed and
Right.
sometimes things need to be led. But if you have only a leader with no management, there are certain things that fall through the cracks. And if you have managers that aren't leaders, there's also other problems that go with that. And so to me, this entrepreneurial CEO is actually doing some of both, which is tricky. And I think that's the thing no one talks about is that's actually a really hard combination of skills.
What do you think makes it hard?
Because they are very different kinds of skills.
Mhm.
Because leading is about big picture thinking and about inspiring
Mhm.
and wanting people wanting to follow you. Okay,
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, I think, can get to that space generally easier because they tend to be big picture thinkers. They tend to
Mhm.
be inspirational. They tend to do all of those things. But in this transition pace, you also need to be a manager. And a
Mhm.
manager is more about the how and the details and some of those other aspects, which on the whole, you know, giant generalization here, entrepreneurs generally suck at.
Yeah.
Okay. Love them, know them, am them. I get it. So that's part of the skill I think that gets really hard in that entrepreneurial CEO world is that
Mm.
there's the leader piece, but there's also this management piece that needs to be done. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs because they don't actually want to be managers. And
Mm.
so this is where it becomes tricky because either you've got to do it or you've got to find someone who can do it, who's good at doing it. But people who are good at doing it you aren't going to find them at $10 an hour in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Right? And so then that becomes the next problem. How do we fund that position
Mhm.
to be able to, it's very chicken and egg issue. Uh,
Yeah, well, and I find so I think it's interesting how you break it between leading and managing. Like, I think that's accurate. I feel like a lot of solopreneurs, though, aren't aren't even there yet, right? Like, they don't especially if you're a solopreneur operating as a service provider. It's all so integrated into who you are and everything you do that I think it's hard to even think like, "Oh, my job is to be the visionary and I need to bring on people to implement." Because you don't even know how to instruct the implementation because for you, it's so integrated into the visionary, the leadership, like it's all jumbled together.
oh yeah, absolutely. The whole parsing it out is part of the challenge of moving from solo to CEO. I think that's one of the huge issues.
Yeah, and I wonder if as you're parsing it out, does it feel a little bit like you're fractioning your identity?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because well, you and I've talked about it before
Mhm.
in the way that you've approached your role before and how we've changed it now.
Mhm.
That when it's all in your brain, it's so easy to communicate to
Mhm.
yourself.
I'm very efficient when it's just me.
Aren't we all? Right? But as soon as I've got to share it with you,
Yeah.
that adds a level of complexity. But when I have to share it to you and somebody else, that adds even more
Mhm.
complexity. Right. And so that's where the problem really falls
Mhm.
into the issue.
Yeah, and so something that I've seen that I think would be valuable to people listening to talk about is because I hadn't really thought about the fractured identity piece of it, but I have witnessed the identity crisis. The when you're working with somebody and they still feel like they have to jump in and fix everything, and then they get frustrated that they have to jump in and fix everything because why am I paying people if I'm always going to have to go fix everything? And then you have to point out to them, this starts and ends with you, right? You have to stop jumping in. You have to work through your team. You have to let that person you hired solve the problems because that's how they're going to learn, because that's how you learned. And I find a lot of times there's some anxiety that comes from it. Like the business owner almost doesn't know what to do with themselves.
Oh, there's a huge piece of, well, back to the same Dan Sullivan quote. There's a huge piece of, if I'm not fighting fires, what use am I?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if I see there's a fire, well, then obviously I should go get the fire extinguisher. And it's like,
Right.
no, someone else can get the fire extinguisher. It doesn't have to be you. You may need to tell someone, go get the fire extinguisher.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But you don't necessarily have to go get it and use it. They say you need to go get it, and they're like, we don't know how to use it. Let me show you how to use it. Right. I mean, and that feels so inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But it's only inefficient the first time. It's not inefficient every time after that. And so what this really is back to, and I'm sure you'll put the link in the show notes, of delegation,
Mm-hmm.
right? True delegation is hard and it's very uncomfortable, right? And that's part of going from solo to CEO, is actually getting comfortable with and good at delegating, which really is more of a manager skill as opposed to a leadership skill, of helping them figure out how to solve the problem, not solving the problem for them.
Right.
Back when I was doing knitting instruction, one of the things people would say is, they're a really good knitter. They should they should be a teacher. And I would watch them, and the difference is, did they take the work out of someone's hand and do it, or were they able to talk them through how to do it themselves? Right? And to me, that's the difference between a good teacher and a bad teacher. I every once in a while would teach teachers, and some of them would say, well, there's no way I can teach more than 8 people. Without even seeing them, I knew, because they were having to do it for them and show each person individually. It's like, you're right, you never can. But I would teach classes of 20 and 30 people. And I'm like, you can't do that on some of this stuff. And it's like, nope, I absolutely can, because I didn't have to show it to them.
Right.
I was able to let them figure it out, go through the mistakes, help them through their mistakes so that they actually learned how to do it themselves.
Yeah. And you're right. That is a much harder skill if you haven't done it before. It definitely takes some time and practice. And it takes patience.
And the patience of, oh my God, I could have had this done an hour ago, is really where most of the entrepreneurs lose it. Quite honestly.
Well, I was going to say, it's actually 2 places, I think. So there's the patience piece, right? I could have done this so much faster on my own with fewer mistakes, got it done right the first time. Also, what I see is lead time. See, an entrepreneur is used to having an idea and implementing that idea today. But when you have a team, and I know this because I'm oftentimes like the first non-VA level team member that a business will hire.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, you can't have the idea at 8 a.m. and expect me to turn it around as a fractional contractor by 5 p.m. Doesn't work that way. Like, I need you to have the idea today and be okay with implementation in 2 to 4 weeks. And sometimes, depending on how big the idea is, it's 2 to 4 months.
Right.
But, I think sometimes the entrepreneur gets frustrated by that, and they think, well, like that's ridiculous. It shouldn't take that long. What they don't realize is it would take them the same amount of time. It's just because all the ideating is in their head. They haven't set the clock, right? On when they started thinking about
the clock until they were 90% done.
Exactly. And so, and I think that's the other piece. And I can speak for myself when I started hiring people, that I very quickly recognized that I needed to get my stuff in order if I ever wanted to feel like I had hired somebody who had their stuff in order, because it's not their business. It's not their baby. They don't have the vision. They don't have the heart for the industry or for the customer. They need to get all of that from me. They need me to tell them what's important and why, and then they can carry it out. But I've got to think ahead. I have to have some foresight for all of that. And that was really uncomfortable for me.
And I think the other piece that's related to this is owning which part of the problem is actually the CEO's problem. And I think we often make the problem about how they're doing it, the timeline, all of those things as their problem, whoever the they is, whether they're an employee, a contractor, fractional, I don't care who it is, instead of saying, oh no, this is actually my problem. Like we went through this fairly recently, as we were trying to plan for our most recent, in-person retreat that we've had, which we've done several times, but this time there was a lot of other things going on. And it was the first time that one of our team was really trying to help with it. And I realized a whole lot of things got missed. Whose fault was that? Well, I could say it was hers, but it was not hers. It was mine, because I hadn't identified in plenty of time for her to be able to get prepped in plenty of time to be able to do the steps that I needed her to help me do and remind me to do in plenty of time. Now, did it work out fine? Of course it worked out fine, because we all came together and we made it happen, and, all of those things.
Right.
But it would have been really easy to say, I can't believe you're doing this. Why is this not there? Well, the reason it's not there is I didn't give enough information. I didn't give enough space. I didn't give enough time to make that happen. Now, luckily, I've gone through this enough and I'm self-reflective enough, and I have you to help me self-reflect on some of these things to say, oh yeah, this is not her issue. This is my issue.
Right.
But I think the default is to say, oh my God, they suck. Why can't they do the work?
Why can't I find good people? That's what I always feel.
Why can't I find good people? Right?
Yeah.
It's always, sometimes they're not good people, and sometimes maybe we're not good people.
Well, and I remember when I hired Sheena, who was, one of my first grown-up business owner hires, I had hired 3 or 4 people before her. And when I hired her, I was like, okay, here's the deal. I can't find anybody to do this role reliably. They end up ghosting me. They do this. And the fact that 4 people have done that and I'm the common denominator is not lost on me. Let's just really put that out there. And then I gave her permission. I said, so I need you to tell me when you notice that I am doing something that prevents you from delivering on our agreement. Because obviously I don't see it, because I keep rinsing and repeating this whole problem over and over again.
Right.
And I had to listen when she came to me and told me those things.
Which are usually pretty hard things to hear.
Oh, yes. They are very hard things to hear, because why should I do everything this way? That was what she told me. You're not going to be surprised by this, Gwen, right? She's like, well, it's really hard to have the standardized process because nothing in the delivery is standardized. She's like, I've worked with you on 8 projects now. Every single one is unique and built from the ground up. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, so it's really hard for me to give you a process and to have benchmarks and milestones if that's how you're doing things. Oh.
Right.
So, I come by all my understanding and empathy for our listener, honestly, because part of it is some self-compassion here. But there's something else that I feel like we need to sort of transition into, I think, in fairness for the listener, right? Because we've talked about that identity crisis that makes it really tough to go from thinking like a solopreneur to, or I should say, acting like a solopreneur to thinking and acting like a CEO. Because we don't need you to just think like a CEO. Your business needs you to act like one.
Right.
There's that identity crisis. Who am I if I'm not doing the things all the time? Do I have any value if I'm not coming in at the 11th hour and saving the day? The other piece, though, is boundaries.
Well, and it's boundaries on all sides, right?
Right.
It's not just your boundaries, but it's also honoring the other's boundaries and being clear about where all of those are and being okay with it. Actually, really, truly being okay with it. Not saying, when we're actually saying, right?
Right.
It can't be a head nod, a head shake no when we're saying yes. It has to be that we actually are going to honor that boundary. And I think part of that is realizing that you've got to set the boundaries to say, yeah, I'm not going to just jump in unless I'm asked. That could be a boundary, right? But it also has to be clear on their side that they can't let it go past X without asking you, right? I know it was quite a while back now, but I remember that we realized that folks were struggling with things for hours without actually reaching out to the tech support on a particular SaaS tool that we're using, right? And so the problem is if you're actually trying to fix something that's broken on their end, you're going to spend days because you don't actually have the ability or the tools to be able to fix it. This isn't actually about your knowledge. It's about the tool itself. But if we only focus on one piece and we say, I'm going to fix it, I'm responsible for fixing it, we actually had to say, you can spend 30 minutes. After that point, you have to put in a tech support ticket. Right?
Yeah.
Because either they have the answer and they'll find it for you, or they will say, oops, we did an upgrade that actually broke that. Thank you for letting us know. We'll have it fixed in the next, day, 12 hours, 2 hours, whatever the thing is, right? So it's boundaries on both sides. It's not just your boundaries, but it's their boundaries and being really clear about what are those pieces and processes. And that really is starting to think like a CEO, because this is closer. It's still some bit of it is management, but it's also being closer to leadership, saying this is how we behave. This is how we think, and getting that down through the organization, not just for yourself, right? So that becomes another piece of the transition of what are these boundaries we have to set, and being clear, as an example, we don't have an agency, but if we had an agency, we've got friends and clients that have agencies. In an agency situation, if your rule has been, for example, we don't work after normal business hours, knowing that some people's business hours are earlier in the day if they're on the East Coast and they're later in the day if they're on the West Coast. But, we kind of have a general rule there about what business hours are. We need to make sure that those boundaries stay in place with our clients, even when we bring other people who say, oh, but I'm okay working at midnight. It's like, I don't care that you're okay working at midnight. You're going to schedule that email to go out during normal business hours, because we're not establishing the precedent that we're available at midnight. So it's boundaries for you individually. What should I be doing? What shouldn't I be doing? It's boundaries for the people you're working with. What are the guidelines that they need to work in? And it's still boundaries for the organization. What are we okay with as an organization? What are we not okay with as an organization? And I don't care if you personally are okay with it. As an organization, you don't get to do it.
Yeah. And that can be challenging, I think, when you're hiring other entrepreneurs, right? When you're hiring freelancers, because they're like, oh, but this is my best time. And you're like, yes, but you are training my clients that this is my best time and it is not my best time. So please stop doing that. I think also that, since I mentioned clients, I think we need to talk about there is a boundary that you have to establish with your clients, if you're a service provider especially, because as you're making this transition, you're going to have clients who want you to be the doer. And it is so much easier for you to just answer that call. How would you approach setting that boundary, Gwen?
So I think the first thing is being clear why that is changing. Right? It's explaining the why. And the why can be, there's all sorts of why reasons that are right why reasons. So I'm not going to give necessarily the why, because there can be lots of reasons. But sometimes it's so that I'm able to provide this important service to more people, right? Because, when you're only one, you're only one. That's the reality of it. Sometimes it's because I need to be able to do other things that require my unique ability, but I have people who can do this as well, often better than I can do it. So we're bringing them in to be able to support. The list can go on and on and on. But I think communicating that with your clients and helping them understand why this is important to your business, but also doesn't negatively affect their business.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, actually positively affects their business, because now, instead of having to wait 3 weeks to get on my schedule, you can get on the person's schedule, whoever else is on the team, within a week. So now you aren't having to wait 3 weeks. See how much better this is for you? And that's legitimately true, right? You can't do it with a lie. It needs to be a legitimately true reason why it's working for them. And so figuring out where are those pieces and how can it be done, right, is, I think, how you're able to start moving it away from it being you. Now, the other thing is you also can make it true. We've had this with one of our clients where we said, you can get me, but I'm now 3 times as much as the next person below me, right? And so if you really want me, you get me, but you're going to pay for me. Back to, I only have a limited amount of time that I can be offering my services. And oh, by the way, the person that's, a third of my price is also exceedingly excellent at what they do, right? And in some cases, in this particular, in the client that I'm talking about, there are some cases where they're like, nope, we're going to pay this. I remember her saying recently that someone called and said, I need 1 hour of your time. I realize how much it's going to be, but I want you for 1 hour. And she's like,
yeah,
okay, no problem. You can pay the rate and we can do that. But there's other folks that are like, oh yeah, because I know 3 hours of, Sue's time, making up a name here, right, is actually probably worth 2 hours of your time. You may be a little bit better than Sue, but you aren't that much better than Sue, and not at this particular thing. And so I'm actually getting a bargain by working with Sue instead of you.
Right.
Right. And so, and back to focus and all of the other things, right? That it's about what are the reasons that you're doing it and what makes sense. Like right now, we've been making a transition for you doing a little more hands-on work with our clients. Part of it is they've seen you consistently. You are not just some new random person that just like, what, it's like, who the heck is Tonya? Right? Like they've all seen you and interacted with you in some form or capacity over the time that they've been working with me. But we also explained why we're doing it. I'm trying to launch something new, which means I need more time to focus on this. And these are some chunks of time that I can easily delegate to you, and you will do an excellent job. And it's not like I'm running away and they're never going to see me again. They still have access to me, but it's just a little more limited right now.
Yeah, and you make a good point, because I think sometimes, I don't even know how to articulate this, which I feel like I say those words in every single episode, but it's because my brain runs faster than my mouth sometimes, and sometimes it works in the opposite as well. But in our head, to do that, right, to hand over fulfillment to somebody else, is telling the client that they're no longer a priority. And maybe that's because we've felt like that, like we feel like we got moved over to the B team for whatever reason. And so we feel like we're telling the client that, but really it comes down to, one, like you said, giving a reason, but two, that reason needs to set the other person up for success. Like one of the things that you did when informing our clients that I would be handling, and it's actually some very like light level fulfillment stuff. It's not the high touch fulfillment stuff you do. It's very light level. But part of it was I have stepped in that capacity for you over the past couple of years, anytime you've been traveling or doing anything else. Right. So you had seen the quality of the way that I could deliver that service already. They've experienced it. And all you had to do was remind them and say, this is nothing that most of you haven't already experienced. It's just you're going to get this now every single week. However, I'm still going to be paying attention. And if there's anything that Tonya feels like is a little bit over her head, she'll pull me in. And then you have let it, right? Like anytime I've been like, well, Gwen might think something different, but here's what I think. You never go in there and go, yeah, Tonya's off her rocker. Don't listen to her.
I would, though, if I actually thought that was true.
You might, but instead you go, like, oftentimes you go, yeah, everything Tonya said, I have no notes, or you'll say everything Tonya said, and maybe this one additional thing.
Right.
But that's also part of it, right? Is you have to have your boundary with the client, and you have to make your new focus not so much making the client okay with working with the doer, but helping the client to appreciate why they're in the best possible hands at this time with the doer.
Right.
And then making sure the doer has everything that they need. I want to address something else that you just brought up, is the boundaries around strategic thinking. Because I think that's where our solopreneurs really do struggle.
Say more about where you're headed with this. I think I know where you're going, but
yeah. So part of why we build teams, right? Part of why we hire people is because we need more time and space to be the visionary that our business needs, to figure out what's next, get what trend do we follow, what trend do we get ahead of? And that requires thinking time.
Yes.
But we don't like to protect our thinking time, Gwen.
Well, because thinking time doesn't feel valuable. Like, because it's a weird thing to check off on your to-do list. I spent an hour thinking, right? Now, interestingly enough, it's one of the things that I actually have on my quarterly goals is that I spend an hour each week thinking, because I realize I need to have more thinking time, right? Because I also know if I don't actually set it as a goal, it's really easy for it to get lost in the process. But thinking time, true thinking time, not thinking while doing something else time, but real thinking time, and asking yourself the hard questions and saying, what would I say to myself about this thing, whatever it happens to be, is one of the most valuable things you can do, because nobody else is going to do that for your business but you. Right? You may hire someone like me to help you with that process, but it's still, I can't do it for you. I can only do it with you.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's really important to do that thinking piece, but it doesn't feel valuable because we can't show the work. Like, there's no work to show when we're done.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the closest thing we can do is show a journal that has a whole, has several more pages filled out in it. That's like possibly the one thing that we can show out of thinking time. But a lot of times, thinking time takes multiple thinking times before you get a result, before you feel any ROI. We have a process that we use that's part of Nick Peterson's philosophy called open loops. And I have found that I have to leave things open looped for a really, really, really long time before I get resolution on them, before I actually see some ROI from it. Where one of our other clients who does open loops, like, man, she's getting stuff every live long day. But part of it is she's also trained herself for that thinking time.
Right. She's trained the muse.
She has. She's trained herself to say, this is part of my process. This is part of my thinking. I have not yet been that disciplined. I wish I was. I have not been. But I know from having watched others that it will pay off in the end. So I'm trying to be very focused on it and not get wound up when my open loop is not solved the next morning, like we're kind of hoping is supposed to happen. And so it's like, nope, it's going to be okay to keep the same open loop for days on end, if need be. It'll come when it comes.
Yeah.
But that thinking time is a CEO activity. It is not, it's a leadership activity. It's not a management activity.
Okay. So in terms of boundaries, you've talked about communication boundaries, right? About like drawing lines around when we do business, when we don't do business. And it's okay if you do business at a different time, but you need to make it look like we only do business during these times. Talked about boundaries with the clients who expect you to continue being the direct fulfiller of their work. Talked about the boundaries around your thinking time or your visionary time. Any other boundaries that you think are maybe either critical or easy to overlook, hard to implement as you're making that shift from solopreneur to CEO thinking?
I don't know if it's truly a boundary, but it is owning the new identity.
Mm.
And so being okay with what that new identity holds and knowing that that means certain things are no longer true. Like in the example, if you've been the expert at the thing that you're doing and you start bringing in other people so that you are no longer, the expert, there's a point that you got to be okay with. The boundary is I lead the best experts. I am no longer necessarily the best expert.
Mm-hmm.
I lead a team of the best experts. I am no longer necessarily the best expert in whatever it turns out to be. I remember experiencing this when I led an IT department years ago, 20 years ago. I ran an IT department. And it's somebody said, but if such and such happened, you wouldn't know how to fix it. And I said, no, I wouldn't. I said, because that's not my job. My job is not to know how to do all of the things. I had a ton of systems and programs and things that by the time I was really leading it, I couldn't have done hardly anything at all. And my CIO husband now cracks up because I asked him to help me with IT stuff. And he's like, you ran a major IT department. It's like, yeah, I know. But my job wasn't to know the detail. It was not to know the detail. It was to understand the strategy and to be okay with not knowing the detail.
Yeah.
That's a big boundary to be able to hold and say, no, it's okay that I don't know it. That's not my job. That's not my job anymore to know that. So it's a different kind of boundary to be able to be comfortable in this new place. And that means that you have to be doing different things that you probably aren't as good at as you were doing the things before.
Yeah. I mean, that right there, I would say, is the crux of the whole episode.
Yeah, it is. It's the hardest piece, because moving into this other role means you're no longer doing the things that you have often identified yourself with.
So now you need a new identity.
You need
for
a
your
new
business.
identity.
Yeah, for your
And you
business
have to be okay
have
with it. Back to using a knitting teaching example, I would often say in various classrooms, it's like, I am probably not the best knitter in this classroom. I mean, I was a good knitter, obviously. I mean, you can't just be a total hack. But I was a decent knitter. But I know some of my students, and I knew them well to the point that I knew technically they were better knitters than I was. But what I also knew was I was by far the best instructor in that class. So I was able to let go of being the knitter and being the instructor. I knew there was no one in that class that could teach better than I could. They might be able to do better than I could, but they couldn't teach better than I could. Same thing with CEO. You're going to hire, if you really hire great people, you're going to have people that are way better than you, but they aren't going to be able to lead this organization better than you can.
So good. Okay, Gwen, thank you for updating thoughts on this conversation, because again, I mean, there is, I think, plenty of good reason that from solo to CEO, that first episode of the series was our second most, or is our second most downloaded episode of our first year as podcasters. Now, what I would encourage listeners to do right now is tune in to our next episode, because next week we are going to be talking about our number one most downloaded episode, according to listeners, that did not even exist. I don't even know if we had brainstormed it 2 months ago, but it was our dark horse, came out to the front running. And if you are still listening, I would love to hear from you. What do you think about these top episodes that we are featuring? What has been hard or easy for you as you're making that transition from solopreneur to entrepreneur, if that's your experience? You can email me directly at Tonya@everydayeffectiveness.com and tell me where you fall on the scale that Gwen described from solopreneur to CEO. or what you think about this episode or any others. Whatever it is, I read each and every email and I will get back to you probably within about 48 hours because that's one of our standards of practice around here. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.